An elderly man, dressed in his finest blazer and polished shoes, settled into his first-class seat, a place he had dreamed of for years. His hands, worn and weathered by time, gently held the book he had brought along for the flight. The excitement in his heart was palpable. After months of anticipation, he was finally going to visit his grandson. A first-class ticket, a gesture from his beloved grandson, was the surprise of a lifetime, symbolizing the love and appreciation they shared. The hum of the plane filled the cabin, but for this man, it was more than just the sound of an aircraft in motion. It was the sound of a long-awaited reunion as passengers around him settled in. Oblivious to his joy, a flight attendant approached with a brisk and purposeful stride. She was confident, trained to ensure the smooth operation of the flight. But as her eyes landed on the elderly man, her expression shifted. She studied his face briefly, her gaze then lingering on his hands before dropping to the boarding pass resting on his lap. A small furrow creased her brow. Without hesitation, she moved closer to him and in a firm voice demanded, "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" Her tone was sharp, and the unease in her words made the elderly man look up in surprise. He handed over his ticket without hesitation, expecting a simple verification. Yet the flight attendant's response was anything but routine. She frowned, flipping the ticket back and forth, searching for a flaw. "This is a first-class ticket?" she asked, almost in disbelief. What followed was a conversation that would forever change the course of this flight and the lives of those involved. Little did she know, the man she was questioning had far more power than she could ever imagine. The flight attendant stood still for a moment, her eyes fixed on the elderly man as if she were waiting for something to reveal itself. A mistake, a discrepancy, anything that might justify her demand. But when she carefully examined the ticket once again, there was no mistake, no error. His boarding pass was perfectly valid, the information clear and in order. The flight attendant hesitated, flipping the ticket in her hand, as if it might somehow yield more answers if she examined it long enough. But nothing changed. Still, she didn't back down. Her suspicion lingered, and with it came a sense of urgency. She had to do something, take action. There was no turning back now. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice colder than before, "but I'll need you to move to economy class. There seems to be some mix-up with your seat assignment." Her words echoed through the quiet cabin, each syllable harsh and unyielding. The elderly man blinked in confusion, a knot tightening in his stomach. He had been looking forward to this trip for so long. His grandson had saved for months to afford the first-class seat, hoping to give him the comfort he deserved for the long flight. The idea of moving, of being humiliated in front of other passengers, was incomprehensible to him. "No," he said, his voice soft but steady, the weight of the situation sinking in. "This is my seat, my ticket. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time." The flight attendant's eyes narrowed. "I understand, sir, but the seat is for first-class passengers. You've been assigned to a different section," she insisted, her tone becoming more firm, more insistent. "Please cooperate, or I'll have to call security." A murmur spread across the cabin, growing louder by the second. Passengers who had been minding their own business now turned their heads, their curiosity piqued by the tension in the air. Some exchanged uneasy glances, while others whispered to each other, unsure of what was happening. It wasn't long before the whole first-class section was aware of what was unfolding. The elderly man's hands gripped the armrests tightly, trying to steady himself, but his mind was racing. His heart pounded in his chest. The humiliation of being singled out, treated as if he didn't belong, made him feel small and insignificant. His eyes darted around, looking for help, but no one came forward. It felt as if everyone was silently complicit in his degradation, watching him be humiliated in front of a room full of strangers. As he looked up, he noticed a few passengers looking away quickly, pretending not to notice, while others, more boldly, seemed to watch the unfolding drama with judgment in their eyes. But none of them spoke out. The silence was deafening. "Please," the elderly man said again, his voice trembling now. "I've done nothing wrong. I'm just here to visit my family. My grandson is waiting for me." The flight attendant's face remained impassive, as if she were simply following orders. She raised her chin slightly, as if to assert her authority over him. "I understand," she replied almost dismissively. "But it's procedure. You need to move now, or I'll be forced to escalate this." The elderly man's chest tightened. The situation was spiraling out of his control, and the weight of being publicly humiliated in front of everyone was unbearable. Yet, despite everything, he did not raise his voice or argue. Instead, he slowly reached for his bag, his fingers shaking as he picked it up. He stood up, the murmur of voices intensifying around him. Every step he took seemed heavier than the last, as if the very air was pressing down on him. As he moved past the first-class seats toward the economy section, something inside him snapped. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about being treated with dignity and respect. And in that moment, the elderly man made a decision that would change everything. He took out his phone, his fingers typing a message quickly. His face was calm, but his heart raced. The words on the screen felt like they held the power to change his fate. He pressed send, slipped his phone back into his pocket, and continued to walk toward the back of the plane. The flight attendant, oblivious to the message he had just sent, continued her rounds, her confidence unshaken. She believed the matter was settled. She had done what was necessary to restore order, or so she thought. Minutes later, the flight attendant, still moving about the cabin, was suddenly interrupted by a voice from the cockpit. A man in a sharp suit stood up in the aisle, his presence commanding the room's attention. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice deep and steady. The flight attendant froze. Her eyes flickered nervously from the man in the suit to the elderly gentleman who had just been forced to move. There was a brief moment of silence before she spoke, her voice a little more uncertain than before. "Yes, sir," she said. "There's been a mix-up with his ticket." The man in the suit, without hesitation, took the elderly man's boarding pass and scanned it carefully. His eyes widened as he read the information. Then, he turned to the flight attendant, his expression shifting to one of cold disbelief. "There's no mix-up," he said, his voice firm. "This is Mr. Dawson. He's not just a first-class passenger. He's one of the airline's co-founders." The words struck the flight attendant like a thunderclap. Her face drained of color as the realization hit her. The man she had just humiliated, the man she had so confidently demanded to move, was someone she should have respected far more than anyone else on that plane. The power in the room shifted, and all eyes turned toward her. Mr. Dawson, the elderly man, sighed softly, folding his hands in his lap. "I wasn't going to say anything," he said, his voice calm and composed. "I just wanted to visit my grandson in peace." The flight attendant's confidence, which had once been unwavering, crumbled in an instant. Her posture sagged, and her words became a whisper. I didn't mean to," she stammered, her apology falling flat in the face of the truth. The man in the suit cut her off before she could finish. "Apologize to Mr. Dawson," he commanded, his tone sharp. "Now." The flight attendant, visibly shaken, turned to Mr. Dawson, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry, sir," she said, her words lacking the authority she once had. "I didn't mean to." Mr. Dawson waved her off, offering a small smile. "It's all right, dear," he said. "Just remember, respect isn't about appearances." As she hurried away, the passengers exchanged guilty looks. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others lowered their eyes, realizing the gravity of what had just happened. Meanwhile, Mr. Dawson, unshaken, simply opened his book again, his actions speaking volumes about the dignity and respect he demanded without ever raising his voice. The tension in the cabin was palpable. As the man in the sharp suit stepped forward and revealed the true identity of the elderly passenger, the entire atmosphere shifted. The flight attendant's heart skipped a beat as she realized the depth of her mistake. Mr. Dawson wasn't just any passenger. He was one of the co-founders of the airline she worked for. The weight of her actions hit her like a tidal wave, crashing over her with overwhelming force. Her mind raced, but her body seemed frozen in place. The realization that she had publicly humiliated someone with so much influence over the airline was almost too much to bear. The words of the senior airline employee echoed in her mind, a harsh reminder of the gravity of her misjudgment. "He's not just a first-class passenger. He's one of our co-founders." Those words felt like a slap, each one more stinging than the last. She tried to steady herself, but it was as if the ground beneath her feet had given way, leaving her struggling to regain her composure. Mr. Dawson sat calmly, folding his hands in his lap, as if the revelation didn't faze him in the slightest. The flight attendant, on the other hand, could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, her throat tightening. She had thought she was in control of the situation. She had believed she was doing her job, ensuring everything was in order, following procedure. But now, she understood just how wrong she was. "Do you realize who this man is?" the senior employee asked, his voice low and measured, though there was an unmistakable edge to it. The flight attendant swallowed hard. She did realize. She could hardly avoid it. Every ounce of her confidence, every bit of authority she once carried, was crumbling under the weight of her own ignorance. The eyes of the passengers, who had been witnessing the exchange in growing discomfort, were now focused solely on her. She could feel their eyes on her, burning into her skin. They knew that she had made a grave error, and now she had to face the consequences. Before she could even gather her thoughts, the senior employee turned to Mr. Dawson. "I'm so sorry for this," he said, his tone respectful, almost apologetic. "We deeply regret what you've had to go through, and we'll make sure this never happens again." Mr. Dawson, however, didn't seem to harbor any ill will. He sighed softly, as if the entire incident was nothing more than a fleeting inconvenience. He wasn't angry, nor was he seeking revenge. He was calm, composed, but that, in itself, was almost more painful for the flight attendant to witness. It was a silent reminder of the power he held, the kind of power that came not from words or gestures, but from his mere presence, his dignified silence. "I wasn't going to say anything," Mr. Dawson spoke up, his voice carrying an undertone of weary patience. "I just wanted to visit my grandson in peace. But now, I suppose we all have a lesson to learn here." The flight attendant felt her face flush, a cold wave of shame washing over her. She had assumed, based on his appearance, that he didn't belong. She had judged him. She had made a decision about him without even questioning it. And now, the consequences of that judgment were unfolding before her. "I'll let you return to your seat, Mr. Dawson," the senior employee continued, glancing at the flight attendant, who still hadn't moved. But I need you to do something first. His eyes locked with hers. Apologize. Now. The words hit her like a hammer, shattering whatever remaining confidence she had left. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her mind raced, but her voice betrayed her. The passengers, still watching in tense silence, were waiting for her to speak, to make things right. She had no choice but to do what was asked of her. The flight attendant's throat tightened as she finally turned to Mr. Dawson, her voice barely a whisper. I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't mean to. I didn't realize. Her words trailed off as she struggled to form the apology that seemed so inadequate, so hollow in comparison to the gravity of the situation. Mr. Dawson waved a hand dismissively, his face softening into a gentle smile. It's all right, dear, he said, his voice kind but firm. Just remember, respect isn't about appearances. The flight attendant nodded, but the weight of those words hung in the air, suffocating her. She had always prided herself on being professional, on doing things the right way. But now she understood that professionalism wasn't just about following procedure. It was about treating others with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance, status, or background. As she hurried away, trying to escape the uncomfortable stares of the passengers, she felt a deep sense of regret settle in her chest. It wasn't just about the mistake she had made. It was about the realization that she had allowed her own biases to cloud her judgment, to affect the way she treated someone who deserved nothing less than the utmost respect. And now, she would have to live with the consequences of her actions. The rest of the flight seemed to pass in a blur. The flight attendant went through the motions, offering drinks, serving meals, and ensuring everything ran smoothly. But her mind was elsewhere. She could still hear the voice of Mr. Dawson in her head, still see the look in his eyes when he spoke those words. Respect isn't about appearances. They haunted her, and the more she thought about them, the more she realized just how deeply she had failed him, and herself. By the time the plane began its descent, the flight attendant was barely able to keep her composure. She knew that what had just happened was far from over. She had learned a harsh lesson, one that would stay with her long after the flight landed. She had assumed, judged, and acted without thinking. And now, she had to face the fact that her actions would have consequences far beyond this flight. As the captain made his announcement and the plane slowly began to land, the flight attendant braced herself. She could already feel the weight of what was to come. The questions, the reprimands, and the harsh reality that her career could very well be over. And no matter how much she wished she could undo what had happened, she knew there was no turning back. The flight descended steadily, the hum of the engines a constant reminder of the impending storm. The flight attendant, standing near the front of the cabin, could feel the weight of every passing second. The air felt thicker now, as though it were pressing down on her, reminding her that something far beyond her control was about to unfold. The realization that the passengers had witnessed her shame, her misstep, was a weight she could no longer ignore. Every subtle glance, every unspoken judgment, was unbearable. She had hoped it would end after Mr. Dawson's revelation, that maybe, just maybe, the consequences would be a quiet, private matter. But deep down, she knew better. The announcement from the captain cracked through the murmur of the cabin like a lightning strike. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice rang out, firm and unyielding, "I'd like to personally acknowledge a very special guest on this flight today. Mr. Dawson, one of our co-founders, who is traveling to visit his grandson." The moment the captain's words left his mouth, the flight attendant's heart stopped. Her face flushed with an almost unbearable heat, and she could feel her body stiffening as the eyes of every passenger turned toward her. The captain's voice continued, but the words seemed muffled to her, drowned by the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. "We sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding regarding his seating arrangement. Mr. Dawson's loyalty and contributions to this airline are invaluable." Her stomach churned. She had been exposed, but this wasn't just a quiet exposure. It was public, humiliating, and it was happening right in front of her. The passengers, many of whom had likely been on edge during the scene, now exchanged looks of dismay, some offering sympathetic glances, while others were visibly uncomfortable. And she, The flight attendant stood at the center of it all, her professional facade shattered, her dignity gone as the captain's announcement ended. The tension in the cabin didn't subside. The flight attendant barely heard the rest of the routine instructions. Her thoughts were clouded, and she could feel the gravity of her actions hanging over her like a dark cloud. She had been harsh, quick to judge, and in doing so, she had not only embarrassed Mr. Dawson but herself as well. And now, there was no escaping the consequences of her own actions. As the plane taxied to the gate, she was told to remain at the front of the cabin, awaiting further instructions. The thought of facing Mr. Dawson again sent a chill down her spine, but she knew there was no avoiding it. She had already made the biggest mistake of her career. Nothing could be worse than this moment. But the reality that awaited her when the plane landed was even more crushing. The flight attendants gathered their belongings, preparing for disembarkation, but the senior employee who had revealed Mr. Dawson's identity called for the flight attendant to step into the galley. The words that followed were the final blow. "You will need to go up to the front and apologize to Mr. Dawson in front of everyone. We expect this to be done immediately. Your actions were unprofessional and inappropriate, and we can't allow this to go unaddressed." The flight attendant's throat tightened. She had thought it couldn't get worse. But standing before a full cabin of passengers, having to publicly apologize for what felt like a colossal failure, was worse than she had imagined. She was asked to speak in a clear, professional voice, but the words felt foreign, choking her as she forced them out. She stepped forward, her heart racing. Mr. Dawson was seated comfortably, his calm demeanor in stark contrast to the storm brewing within her. The weight of the moment crashed over her, suffocating her. "Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to apologize for the misunderstanding earlier," she began, her voice trembling. "I wrongfully asked Mr. Dawson to move, and I deeply regret my actions. I apologize to him and to all of you for the discomfort this caused." The silence that followed was deafening. She could feel the heat of the passengers' eyes, their silent judgment surrounding her. She waited, but the words didn't come easily. Apologizing felt like swallowing broken glass, but she had no choice but to finish. She bowed her head slightly, hoping to disappear into the floor as soon as the flight landed. Her worst fears were realized. She was called to the back office, where the full extent of her mistake was laid bare. The senior employee met her with a stern expression, and the air in the room was thick with tension. There were no words of comfort, no chance to explain herself. The reality was harsh. "You will be suspended immediately," the senior employee said, his voice colder than before. "This incident will be reported to corporate, and you'll need to provide a detailed explanation for your actions. You failed to follow procedures. You misjudged Mr. Dawson, and you humiliated him in front of passengers." Her chest tightened as the weight of those words hit her. She had failed, not just in her job, but as a person. The acknowledgement that her career could be on the line was like a knife in her gut. "I understand," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she fully did. She was numb, her mind struggling to keep up with the unfolding consequences. The senior employee's expression softened just slightly. "This is a serious matter," he continued. "You will need to explain why you did what you did. You'll need to take full responsibility, and you'll be meeting with corporate management for a full review. I don't need to tell you that this could very well cost you your job." She nodded, the words sinking in like lead. There was no escaping the consequences of her actions, no apology that could undo what had been done. Later, as she sat in the break room, waiting for the corporate call, her mind spiraled. The humiliation, the disappointment, the regret, all of it weighed on her like a heavy cloak. She replayed the moment with Mr. Dawson over and over again. Why hadn't she checked his ticket properly? Why hadn't she treated him with the same respect she gave to every other passenger? How had she let her bias take over so completely? Minutes dragged into hours, and when the call finally came, it was not the lifeline she had hoped for. "Miss Taylor." The voice on the other end was sharp and businesslike. "We've received multiple complaints, and after reviewing your actions, we've made a decision. You're fired. You'll need to submit a written report explaining your conduct. and you'll be escorted off the premises immediately." The finality of the words sent a shockwave through her, and she struggled to hold back tears. She had never imagined her career would end like this. In one fell swoop, she had lost everything: her job, her dignity, and her sense of self-worth. She handed over her badge and airline ID. The door to her past slammed shut behind her. She had judged a man, assumed his place in the world, and now she had paid the ultimate price. The weight of it all settled in her chest, and she realized that no amount of apologies, no amount of explanation, would change the fact that she had let her biases cloud her judgment. And in the process, she had destroyed everything she had worked for. The days that followed were a blur of disbelief and overwhelming regret. The flight attendant, now suspended from her job, found herself in an emotional freefall, caught between the stark reality of her actions and the relentless tide of shame that seemed to swallow her whole. It wasn't just the loss of her job that stung the most. It was the profound realization that her once steadfast sense of self was shattered, too. Her career had defined her. It had given her purpose, stability, and pride. But in one fateful moment, that sense of pride was ripped away, leaving her with nothing but her own reflection and the hollow echoes of her mistakes. She hadn't imagined it would come to this. She had always prided herself on professionalism, on doing things by the book, never letting her personal opinions cloud her judgment. She had worked tirelessly for years, ensuring smooth flights and maintaining order in a world that, for most passengers, was nothing more than a fleeting experience. But now, after what had happened, the truth was glaringly clear. She had failed in every way. The respect she had once commanded from her colleagues and passengers was now gone. It was as if she had disappeared from the professional world, reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale. Her phone buzzed constantly, the notifications a constant reminder of the ripple effect her actions had caused. Social media had exploded with videos from the flight, clips that captured the moment she had humiliated Mr. Harris, and the subsequent public apology that had followed. The hashtag flight attendant fail trended for days, her face plastered across every platform, the judgment swift and unforgiving. Hashtag flight attendant fail was everywhere. The clips of her demanding that Mr. Harris move, only to later find out he was one of the airline's co-founders, were shared thousands of times. Comments flooded in from every corner of the internet. Some people sympathized, others didn't. "This is why you should never judge a book by its cover." One comment read, "She deserves everything that's coming to her." Another wrote, "The judgments were loud and harsh." People from all walks of life had seen what she had done, and now they were making sure she would never forget it. The noise of public judgment was deafening, but it was the personal reflection that hurt the most. She had treated Mr. Harris as though he didn't belong in first class. She had seen his age, his worn clothes, his unassuming presence, and in her mind, he didn't fit the image of a first-class passenger. She had assumed that someone who looked like him couldn't possibly be a co-founder of the very airline she worked for. That thought haunted her day and night. How could I have been so wrong? The question played over and over in her mind. She had judged him before even giving him a chance, before bothering to verify his ticket properly or treating him with the respect he deserved. It wasn't just the mistake that cut her deep. It was the realization that she had let her own biases dictate her actions. The assumptions, the stereotypes, all of them had come to the surface in that single moment, and now she had to face the consequences. The weight of public scrutiny felt heavier than any punishment she could have imagined. She wasn't just dealing with the loss of her job. She had lost something far more valuable: the respect of her colleagues and the trust of the passengers who once relied on her professionalism. She had let them down in a way that couldn't be fixed with an apology or a plea for understanding. The look on Mr. Harris's face, the quiet dignity with which he had carried himself in the face of humiliation, was burned into her memory. She had failed to see the man for who he was, not just an elderly passenger, but someone deserving of the same respect she had given to every other traveler. As she scrolled through social media, she found herself reading the comments more and more, unable to stop herself. Some were supportive, understanding the mistake and calling for forgiveness, while others were merciless. If she had just checked the ticket properly, none of this would have happened. One comment read, It's hard to believe people still think like this in 2025, another pointed out. The criticisms were unrelenting, and every notification that popped up felt like another reminder of how far she had fallen. But the worst part was not the social media backlash. It was the way her colleagues now looked at her. She had always been a respected member of the team, someone who others turned to for guidance, someone who upheld the rules without question. But now the dynamic had shifted. Whispers followed her wherever she went. Her colleagues no longer saw her as a leader or a figure of authority. They saw her as the person who had made a grave error, the person who had treated a man so unfairly. They couldn't unsee what had happened, and neither could she. She knew they didn't look at her the same way anymore. The loneliness of it all was suffocating. She had always been a professional, someone who stood above the fray, untouched by personal matters. But now she found herself isolated. The job she had once relied on for security and validation was no longer there to comfort her. She was left with nothing but the harsh reality of her actions. The flight attendant sat in her apartment late into the night, her mind racing with thoughts of Mr. Harris and what she had done. She had spent years cultivating her career, working tirelessly to prove herself, to be seen as competent and professional. But now all that work seemed meaningless. Her reputation had been ruined in an instant. She had been exposed for what she truly was, someone who had let assumptions and biases rule her actions. And worse, she had allowed those biases to shape the way she treated others. Her phone buzzed once again. It was a text from a friend, someone she hadn't spoken to in a while. "I saw what happened. Are you okay?" The simple message made her stomach churn. No, she wasn't okay. She wasn't sure she ever would be again. As she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she knew that the path forward was uncertain. She had lost her job, her reputation, and her place in the airline industry. But perhaps, just maybe, she could find a way to rebuild, to redeem herself in the eyes of those who mattered most, herself and the people she had wronged. The journey wouldn't be easy, and it would take time. But the first step would have to be understanding the gravity of her actions and accepting that she had hurt others in ways she couldn't undo. The hard truth was this: redemption, if it was even possible, would require more than just an apology. It would require change, real, lasting change. And that change, she knew, would begin with herself. The story of the flight attendant and Mr. Harris serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of treating others with fairness and respect, no matter their appearance, status, or the assumptions we might make about them. In our daily lives, we interact with countless people, often making snap judgments based on what we see, hear, or assume. Yet, this story shows us that quick judgments, especially those rooted in biases, can lead to devastating consequences. The flight attendant's actions were a stark reflection of how easily we can fall into the trap of judging people by their appearances. Her decision to ask Mr. Harris to move from his first-class seat was based on a superficial assumption. He didn't look like someone who belonged in that seat. She didn't take the time to verify his identity properly or approach the situation with the respect it deserved. The consequences were swift and severe. Not only did she lose her job, but she also faced the scorn of the public, the judgment of her colleagues, and the irreversible damage to her reputation. The harsh reality here is that in today's interconnected world, everything is recorded. Every action, every word, can be captured and shared widely, sometimes leading to irreversible consequences. Social media, with its vast reach, can turn a mistake into a viral moment that spreads across the globe in an instant. The flight attendant learned this lesson the hard way. What this story teaches us is more than just the importance of treating people with respect. It calls us to slow down, to question our assumptions, and to ensure that we are not letting our biases cloud our judgment. It reminds us that appearances are often deceiving, and that the person we assume doesn't belong in a certain space might actually be someone who holds a position of power, influence, or respect. Mr. Harris was, in this case, a co-founder of the airline. A small, seemingly insignificant mistake, the flight attendant's snap judgment, caused a ripple effect that changed both of their lives. But the lesson doesn't end there. Beyond the personal responsibility we must take in our interactions with others, there's also a broader lesson about accountability. The flight attendant's quick actions, her refusal to apologize initially, her failure to verify Mr. Harris's credentials properly, show us that it's easy to act hastily and make decisions without thinking about the consequences. However, in the world we live in today, where transparency is key, those consequences can be far-reaching. It is essential that we not only take accountability for our actions, but also understand the broader impact they can have, especially when they are shared on social media or made public. The emotional weight of the story also highlights the significance of empathy. If the flight attendant had paused for a moment, considered Mr. Harris's perspective, and taken the time to understand the situation better, the entire ordeal could have been avoided. Her actions were a result of a lack of empathy, a failure to see beyond appearances and to treat Mr. Harris with the respect he deserved from the start. In a world that's increasingly connected and transparent, empathy is no longer a luxury. It's a necessity. Taking a moment to understand the lives, backgrounds, and struggles of others can lead to more thoughtful and considerate actions. This story also sheds light on how the smallest decisions we make can change the course of our lives. The flight attendant's decision to treat Mr. Harris differently, based on assumptions about his appearance, created a cascade of consequences that could have been avoided with a little more patience and care. She didn't just lose her job. She lost the trust and respect of those around her, and she became a symbol of how bias can cloud one's professional integrity. The key takeaway here is that every action matters. The way we treat others, especially those we don't know, shapes the narrative of our lives and impacts the world around us. It's easy to think that our decisions, our judgments, are isolated events that don't affect the bigger picture. But as the flight attendant learned, they ripple outward, affecting others in ways we might not even realize. Mr. Harris, in this case, was a victim of unfair treatment, but he also served as an example of grace and dignity. He didn't retaliate with anger or humiliation. Instead, he quietly let his actions speak louder than the flight attendant's words ever could. His decision to carry on without making a scene is a reminder to us all that sometimes the best response to injustice is to rise above it, rather than adding fuel to the fire. For us, the audience, there's much to learn from both sides of this story. We must ask ourselves, how often do we make assumptions about others based on what we see? How many times have we judged someone without knowing their full story? And, just as importantly, how do we respond when we are the ones treated unfairly? Do we choose anger, or do we choose grace? This story is a reminder that we should never take fairness for granted. Treating others with respect, regardless of their appearance or background, is not just about being polite. It's about recognizing their inherent dignity as human beings. It's about choosing to see people as they are, not as we perceive them to be based on external factors. This simple act of respect can create a ripple effect of kindness, understanding, and positive change. In conclusion, the flight attendant's journey is one that can resonate with all of us. It's a story of a mistake, a humbling lesson, and a reminder of the power of empathy. It shows us how important it is to treat others with fairness, to slow down and question our biases, and to always strive for kindness in our daily interactions. We may not always get it right, but every day is an opportunity to do better, to be better. If this story moved you, taught you something, or made you reflect on your own actions and judgments, I invite you to subscribe to the channel for more thought-provoking content. Let's continue to explore these important lessons together and become better, kinder individuals in the process. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and remember, treating others with respect can change the world.